In this episode, I am going to be reviewing the film noir from 1950, Where the Sidewalk Ends, which was directed by Otto Preminger. It starred Dana Andrews, Gene Tierney, Gary Merrill, and Karl Malden. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a film podcast where I explore movies from all over the world and talk about how those stories are told on film. This was a film that I've been meaning to see for quite some time. I've always liked Otto Preminger a lot, and his films were always daring, always bold, always pushing the envelope. You look at something like that came after this, The Man with the Golden Arm with Frank Sinatra, which explored drug addiction, and 1950s heroin addiction, which was, extremely daring and controversial to have in a mainstream film. And then, of course, after that, you saw in 1959, Anatomy of a Murder with Jimmy Stewart, Ben Gazzara, and a wonderful ensemble cast, really exploring law and issues like rape and corruption. And this also explores corruption, Where the Sidewalk Ends, essentially about Dana Andrews, who's a police officer, and we meet him off the top as he's talking to his superior at the police station. And there's been a lot of complaints about him because he's violent and he pushes people around, and he abuses his power, and he justifies it by saying, well, they're just criminals. And his superior basically says, no, you enjoy hitting people, you enjoy beating these people up, you get your kicks off of it. I mean, he's essentially like a gang member. But this film really centers around morals, one's morals, and it's this thick plot, melodramatic plot, but yet has these rich, colorful characters. What you find out later about Dana Andrews, and it's interesting because as the protagonist, you don't like him at all. I mean, at least I didn't like him. He's a brutal guy who abuses his power, and not a very nice guy. But he ends up killing someone that he was questioning over another murder case, and then he finds he didn't mean to kill the guy. The guy did attack him, and he punches him in the face, and and as he falls, he hits his head and he dies. What you find out later was that he was a war veteran, a war hero actually, and he had a metal plate in his head, and as a result of falling on it, he passed away. So he's trying to cover this up and make it look like a gangster did it, a gangster that he really hates, and he tries to get away with it, and again in this melodramatic way in which they do it. Now, I won't go into the details of how he covers it up, and because you really have to see it. I'll be here all day to go into those details. But essentially, the guy he kills is married to Gene Tierney's character, and as Dana Andrews meets her, he begins to be romantically interested in her. And what happens is the police officer played by Karl Malden, he ends up believing that Gene Tierney's father did it because he was abusive towards Gene Tierney, and her father said, if you do that again, I'm gonna knock you out. So the police felt that he was someone who possibly did this. He had showed up there the night of his murder. And what's interesting is that Karl Malden is the one who really believes it was the father. I mean, he doesn't even question the fact that it could have been Dana Andrews. And what's interesting is that he knew Dana Andrews was also there. But, I suppose because he was a police officer, he wouldn't have even thought that a cop would do this. And you don't know as much about his character because he's new on the task, and he's a new superior to Dana Andrews. So he doesn't, he's almost like this black and white sort of person, good guy, bad guys. Well, it couldn't have been any of our guys. Not that is something that goes into with his character, but it's interesting how he just tries to push this case shut. Later on, the other detective there even criticizes Karl Malden for trying to not look into other leads into this case. I mean, he's just putting Gene Tierney's father in jail, and even though yes, he I can see why Karl Malden would certainly think he was someone to investigate, but he was really trying to push it on this guy, and you wonder why his questions. I mean, it's almost out of ego, almost as if he was trying to prove how quickly he could figure this out, how smart he was. So he's a highly flawed police officer as well, really interesting character, and Karl Malden was really good in it as well. But Dana Andrews, it's kind of funny in a way, because Dana Andrews knows it wasn't that guy, and because it's Gene Tierney's father, and he's becoming attracted to Gene Tierney. He's no, it's not the father. So throughout the film, he's trying to get the father out of this, but he doesn't want to say that he did it. So he's trying to pin it on Gary Merrill, who's this, the gangster that you see off the top, and in the other murder that took place that they originally were investigating, which led to this. Now, so it has its twists and turns, and I'm usually not the biggest fan of thick plots of very incident-driven films. I know noir can have a good balance of having colorful characters, complex characters within a strong plot, or sometimes maybe it's somewhat of a heavy plot but stronger on characters. This has a good balance of a really heavy melodramatic plot with these strong characters, and he goes through this journey, Dana Andrews, and you begin to root for him because you want him to save Gene Tierney's father, and Gene Tierney in turn is starting to become attracted to Dana Andrews, and this marriage she had with the war veteran who was killed is they've been separated for months. He's abusive. She tells him that it's over between them, and she also talks about how he's out of work. He's clearly turned to violence. You see him off the top. He's working with these gangsters, and he's trying to help them. He's trying to profit off them, and that's a theme often amongst film noir, is that these people come back from the war and they turn to crime because of what they went through, lack of opportunities, lack of resources, lack of help. That's something you saw a lot in film noir, and it really was reflecting, unfortunately, society at that time. So, throughout the whole film, Dana Andrews basically is it's not working out, and he continues to abuse his power, to put it on Gary Merrill. And Gary, what you later find out is that Dana Andrews is sort of the reason he's abuses his power is because his father was a criminal and knew Gary Merrill, and worked with Gary Merrill. And that's why, you wonder throughout the film, why does Dana Andrews hate this guy so much? Is it just because he hates criminals, but yet he abuses his power? But it's a little more specific, and it's a little more, it is well drawn out in his psychologically as to why he hates these people. It's because he's self-destructive in that sense. He hates the thug in himself, and so therefore he takes that out on other thugs. But and then on the other hand, he wants to be a good person. That's why he becomes a police officer, to quote unquote do good, and he falls into his flaws. I mean, he's a man that doesn't know himself. He's very reactive. He's quick to punch, and he reacts with violence when things don't go his way, which I imagine is what his father died in jail, as he says, trying to blow his way out of prison. So I thought that was really interesting, and you begin, for a protagonist that off the top you really don't like, you end up feeling for him. It's certainly something you began to see a lot in the films of the 1970s, which, often filmmakers were inspired by film noirs, where you had characters who were not necessarily likable, a lot of protagonists, and you end up feeling for them, empathizing with them, because you see why they do what they do. He comes to turn himself in, and that happens also because of Gene Tierney, because someone loved him. And there's another really interesting character. He's meeting Gene Tierney at this diner, and he gets along with this woman there. They have some interesting banter. You get the impression that they've known each other for quite some time. And she tells Gene Tierney, this guy, he's got no one in his life. He doesn't have any friends. He doesn't have any children. He has no love in his life. That's what he needs. He's a man who has no one loves him, and he doesn't know how to love. And I think because he began to fall in love with Gene Tierney, and he sees that she in turn is falling in love with him, and that she cares about him. These are feelings he hasn't experienced yet. And I think that's why he basically goes within and faces himself and faces his own morals, and he begins to realize that he's been doing a lot of bad things, and he needs to, quote unquote, redeem himself by turning himself in. And it's really clever because he doesn't get away with it. He gets arrested, and sure enough, it was self-defense. But I don't know. I mean, should he have been hitting that guy in the way in which he did? Even it's interesting because he's a police officer. And we see cops get away with this all the time. They'll claim self-defense. But, yes, he was attacked, but surely they're trained to stop that and not have to punch someone in the way in which he did. I mean, he punched him a few times, quite hard. So you don't know what's going to happen to him. Is he going to go to trial and get away with it? But that's not really what's important. What's important and what's interesting is that he comes to realize that he was wrong. He comes to realize that what he's doing is wrong, that he's trying to just save himself throughout this whole movie, and he needs to face responsibility. And Gene Tierney says, "I'll wait for you. I believe that it was out of self-defense." She sees a side of him that he didn't see in himself. And he was even willing to die for it, as we saw in the scene prior where he writes this letter out saying what happened, and he tries to get Gary Merrill basically to kill him, so that when they find his body, they'll see the letter that he did it, and that Gary Merrill will get arrested for killing him. I mean, that was probably his best hope, I suppose. But I just love that end where he thinks that Gene Tierney is he just says goodbye. That's it. It's going to be nothing's going to happen between us because look at how terrible I've been. And she smiles at him. She basically says she'll stand by him, and it's hopeful. It's interesting with film noirs. You have characters that usually doom protagonists and things end badly, but there are those few that have these not so cleaned up endings. There's some ambiguity. There's people are still paying for what they did, but there's still some hope for the future. We saw that in The Big Heat as well with Glenn Ford's character. Occasionally, it's really interesting how they managed to do that within, again, this melodramatic plot and these rich characters. And I loved it. I thought it was fantastic, beautiful. Ben Hecht, of course, who people will know worked with Hitchcock. He was an actor in many films. He wrote the script as well with Victor Trivis and Frank P. Rosenberg. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It is on the Criterion channel until January 31st this month. It's being taken down. But you can, I think it's pretty easy to find otherwise on other streaming services. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this review. I'm also on Patreon. For those of you who don't know what Patreon is a exclusive membership program where you get bonus content that I create. And that bonus content is based on polls that I send out at the beginning of every single month. So you get to vote on different options of things that would interest you. And I have things that are dedicated to film noir and movies from all over the world, all types of different films, as well as a newsletter where I talk about what I'm up to outside of the podcast. But that is, of course, film related, such as books I'm reading on film that I recommend, other movies I've been checking out, and things like that. So it's just a few bucks a month, and it really helps creators sustain their YouTube channels in order to keep making free content for those of you who are enjoying watching myself or other podcasters on YouTube and other various audio podcasts as well. So head to patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my channel. It is absolutely free to do so. Just press the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head right here to your top left in just a second. just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release a new video or go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.